has now been around for 3 seasons, and coaches everywhere are saving time and being more efficient when it comes to scout cards. Coach Robinson from Texas says, "The thing I most enjoy is the ease of access to all the scout cards and how I can draw on them if I need to make any changes. Every coach that uses it says that it is so great to use. If you and your staff are tired of the old ways of preparing and using scout cards, check out thecoachpad.com to start enjoying Scout Team and making the 2023 season better than ever."
Welcome back to another episode of the Gap Downbacker podcast. Today we have currently the AD, but a longtime high school football coach at Parkview Baptist, Coach Scott Dieterich. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No problem, Coach. And like I said, it was a good time talking to you before we started, and we've messaged back and forth a little bit. And like I said, we talked a little bit about your recent changes, but I mean, how did you end up not only being a longtime coach at Parkview Baptist, but now being the AD at Parkview?
Um, it really was a combination of things, just from being here for 20 years, coaching and sharing different roles, carrying some athletic director duties in the off season of football. Really, along with my wife and family being here for all those years, just made a lot of lifelong connections. And I chose to leave in the spring of 19. I've got some public school years and wanted to get back into that realm and finish my career probably in public schools. When COVID hit, it opened up. I know it shut down a lot of things, but it opened up a new opportunity for my wife. And by that, I had to leave the job that I was at, and it kind of long route, short route, into me back up here at Parkview in an athletic director role. So just with my previous connections here, a lot of the same people are still here, and just my longtime ties and love for the school and the love for the people here. It was an easy transition back.
Good. Now the other thing, first thing I want to get to, because like I said, I reached out to you in part because I was reading Rich Hargett's wing-based offense book, and you had, I think, one or two. I know you had one for sure.
Yeah.
Chapter. I'm not gonna say article, chapter in it. And it was pretty detailed on how you install things in the Flexbone. And I mean, first thing I want to ask you, and this is why I like to ask Flexbone guys, is why the Flexbone? Why was that your offensive choice throughout the years? Why were you committed to that offense?
That's an excellent question. In this day and age, it's a very valid question. And if you venture into the Flexbone world, you're going to get asked that many, many times, successful or not. But I'm an old ex quarterback, and I love to throw the football, believe it or not. And if you looked at some game tape from the past, you'd say, "Wait, I thought you liked to throw the football." And I jokingly tell people, but seriously as well, the only thing I like probably more than just watching a well executed passing game is to win. And the situations I've been in early in my career, I spent some time with a coach that really took me under his wing and taught me option football. I realized that in a lot of programs, this style of play gives you the best chance to be successful, not only as an offense but as a team, because it's very unselfish. It can be time consuming, limit possessions, all the known variables of flexbone football of why you do it. And honestly, and growing up, I'm old enough to, playing football in the 80s. I played FCS, what we used to call Division 1AA football at McNeese State, an currently FCS school in Southwest Louisiana. And the kings of 1AA football back then were Georgia Southern. And Georgia Southern was a prolific double slot, triple option, spread option, what they called it back then. That takes on a whole new meaning nowadays. And they were the kings of our division. And I'm like, we never played them, but from afar, I'm watching these guys just rip through people and end up in the national championship every year. And I was kind of enamored with it. And even as a younger kid, watching the Oklahomas and Alabamas of the world control college football in the wishbone, I always liked option football. Never, really ran it as a player much, as an offense for sure. And in early my coaching career, never really. We carried option plays, but I got a chance about my fourth year coaching to go work for an option guy. And for 2 years, that really gave my career some direction. And we ran full house wishbone one year, and then we evolved to flexbone because that's what a lot of teams were doing. And the reasons of putting those guys up in the slot positions compared to a wishbone halfback. And it just grew from there. He went on to Texas, got smart, made real money in Texas coaching. I moved back to Baton Rouge and got a chance to really grow that offense for 20 years here at Parkview Baptist. And we had a lot of success, won a lot of championships. And I just saw what it could do, the flexibility it had. I mean, we had to turn over every stone over the years to beat better teams, to compete with some of the same teams who just came up with countless ways to try to defend you. And so I'm sold on it because it can really take advantage of a lot of things, but also it can allow you to use players in positions more than it's a system-based offense, but you can also feature players within it as well.
Now let's build off that a little bit, because even today it's still, I mean, effective. Let's not. It's not like this is something from the 80s that just got stuck there and isn't effective anymore. I mean, there's teams in Ohio that run effectively. I mean, up into this year, Army, Navy still ran it. Air Force still runs it. I know there's plenty of D3 and lower D2 teams that still run it. I've had Terry Harrison on, who's at Friends at AII program, who runs it. Like, it's still a very successful offense. And you could argue it's evolved a little bit with the Coastal Carolina-esque Kennesaw State stuff, or the gun triple stuff. Why do you think the triple is still, and why is it, just in general, why is it such an effective offense?
This day and age, I think for several reasons. Number one, it's so counterculture to what everybody sees. So you a good chance, even in high school these days, it's a good chance you are the only team on everybody's schedule that's going to run this type of offense, because it's just so few teams that do it. So their awareness of the offense, having a plan to defend it. A lot of times they're calling around asking 10 different schools. Probably the best story I can come up with, and we played a lot of teams over the years. We played a team in the semifinals at Parkview around 2017, and this team, I won't mention them, but they were very successful, very talented, several D1 players, 1AA type players, and they were just ripping everybody defensively. I mean, they must have had 3/4 of their games were shutouts. And when I'm watching game film, I'm like, they're not giving up a yard anywhere. But I knew we were something different for them. And they must have went through every front known to man through 3/4 of play, and we ended up beating them pretty soundly. But you didn't feel like we were the more talented team at any point in the game, and especially, but watching a lot of those players kind of play in frozen, lost with their eyes, or not just being able to run to the football or blitz the passer, really made them play differently than they wanted to. So I think one of the main things that makes defenses play differently than what they're trained to do, as far as just all out pursuit. They're tied to responsibilities. They're tied to different players. If you throw in formations and complementary constraint plays, and I think it's a handful for most teams to prepare for, especially if they don't have great awareness of the offense. And these days, it's getting further and further away from defensive coordinators of having seen it, coached it, or defended it. And I think that adds to the difficulty. The biggest problem, probably, coach, is not, to me, is not so much putting pressure on defenses with it. It's many times it's your own fan base that may not be enamored with it just because of style of play. But like I said, as an old ex-quarterback, the only thing I like more than throwing the football is winning. And if that's your best chance, I'm going to stick to my guns. But I think it makes defenses just play totally different than what they want to play and what they play every other week of their season, except probably against you.
Okay. Now the other thing, like I said, so going back to your chapter, like, one of the things that enamored me is just how you teach and how you install. I always freak the point, scheme at this point. I think if you want to figure out what somebody runs and what scheme they run, that's great, and learn what it is, that's fantastic. You can draw up whatever you want on the board, but if you don't know how to teach it or find a way to teach it to be effective for your kids, the scheme doesn't matter. Like, that's just the honest truth. I don't care what school you're at. So you want to break that down, saying how you approach teaching your offense to your kids.
I think once, and I I guess, reinvented the wheel every offseason, because even though we were here with the bulk of our, I guess, the meat of our coaching staff, the head coach, our coordinators, and then even once our first head coach retired, uh, the nuts and bolts and it didn't change. So every offseason, I felt like we started from scratch in our install and teaching progression, knowing that we had some returning players, some new players. But I always felt like with high school kids, you're never wrong starting back over to reinforce what they may have forgotten or why we do what we do or whatever. But once philosophy is established, and I think that's a big point, is establishing philosophy with your kids, why you do what you do, because they're not dumb. They're going to look at television. They're going to hear their parents talk, and you know, other people say, why do y'all run something so old or antiquated or different, boring, whatever they want to call it. So I was very proactive with that, the philosophy of why we do what we do. And I would use any example that could really relate to the kids. And not to get off your question, but there was a good receiver from John Curtis High School in New Orleans, which is a 20, almost 30 state championship type program. They're split back veer. They've been split back veer since day one. And so tremendous success in the state of Louisiana. It's just an icon high school. Well, they had a good receiver a few years ago, Malachi Dupree, I think was the last name. Well, he signs with LSU, and he's on some ratings #1 receiver recruit in the country. And so I use these type of things as an example. And I say, guys, look, if you're a good college football prospect, it's not because of what offense or defense you come in. They can project you to fit in their system. But this kid had, in 3 years as a starter, very modest stats because he came from a split back veer offense. And he probably had the choice of many high schools to go to if he went to a private high school in New Orleans, which he did. And I said, so if he averaged 25 catches a year, that's 75 catches in his career. That's very modest for the #1 receiver recruit in the country. But he went there because he wanted to win championships. And he used camps or combines to showcase his true abilities outside of game film. And so we always try to put the emphasis on winning, doing what it takes to win. And if our best chance was to win, using Flexbone, we did. So we established philosophy. And then once we got off philosophy, we focused on personnel, placing them in our system where they best fit and explaining to them why and what the demands of that position was. And then we started to install the offense once that was in place. And it was different for each position group, whether there's O-line, quarterbacks, wings, or wide receivers, or even tight ends. And we taught them, actually, we started teaching defensive concepts before offensive concepts. We started to teach them about a defense before we ever installed a play, because once we started installing our offensive plays, it was always in context of a defensive look. So if you're talking about the O-line or the core of the offense, the backs, quarterback, fullback, slots, they had to understand, the difference between a 4-2, a 50, a 4-3, a 3-3, a 5-1 bear, because as soon as we said we're going to teach you midline double or triple, it was in context of a defender as their fit, their read, their rule, their block, their reaction. And so if we're just trying to teach them a play without any context, I felt like we were kind of spitting in the wind. So we taught them defenses before we taught offense. And then we started to install our core plays from there. And we tried to mix in the offseason as much logistical work as we could. I always felt like we had to get the cadence down because it's a rhythmic offense with a rhythmic cadence. We had to get the snap in place. We had to get the footwork, the initial footwork, and get our mesh in place. I felt like if we started spring football, and we have spring football in Louisiana, it's limited, but it's still there. Without some core things in place, then we were playing catch up. So we tried to get some things established in the offseason as much as we could. And we just taught the offense and we got it in place. And then, I always felt like defensive and offense for us was flipped. The offseason was our tough time to really get the offense installed. So that once we got to the season, we just tweaked it, we adjusted it, we added subtle things to it, but we repped it. And we were ready for every front, every stunt, every week. Defense, I thought it was in reverse. In the offseason, they had a little easier time to get a base defense in. Then each week they had to prepare for an entirely different offensive system. Whereas I may look at film of, Jones High School down the street that runs a 4-2 against every spread team they see, and I have no idea what they're going to run against us because we're a totally different animal. But our rules are in place, our system is in place, and we do enough things in practice to keep all our footwork, all our schemes available and alive, ready for any front they may throw at us. And my disclaimer to kids every week was, hey, we're going to prepare primarily focused on what they've shown. But we always have some drills built in to where we touch on every front in every weird situation that somebody may throw at us. But at 7:00 on Friday night is when we're going to really find out what their plan is. And that's when we go to work. But installing it that was kind of the progression we followed every offseason.
Now to get a little more detail on that, because obviously with spring ball, we don't unfortunately have it up here just because our weather doesn't allow us to start spring sports soon enough.
Sure.
Because it's still snowing when southern states are playing baseball. But part of my question is like, so okay, looking at that spring ball and how you're approaching it, how do you, what does that first day look like? Is that first day literally just going over the defenses that you're going to see and lining up in your base offense and going over your cadence, or is it how do you approach that? Because you say you go over the defense search, but how's that actually look in practice is what I'm really asking.
Great question. It really comes down to how much we've gotten installed in the offseason. I'm a big proponent of classroom time and field time. If we're on the field, and my assistant coaches, probably offensive assistant coaches over the years, just probably went to sleep with this in their head many times. The guys, look, I'm not saying we don't coach on the field, but we coach while we're moving for the most part. If we stop a drill, if we're walking through something, that's because that's just planned that way. But things that we can install in the classroom, or even if it's a walkthrough, then let's do that. But when we're on the field, that to me is valuable time to where they're actually repping and they're executing, because I've got some quirky, weird sayings or things, but I think they have sense. And one thing to me, we have a philosophy on offense of things that we emphasize. I never talk about statistical goals. The only statistical goal I ever mention our kids is scoring one more point than the other team. Otherwise, I never talk about averaging so much on first down or this play or whatever. But we talk about TNTs, and 11 is one. TNTs being to do the things that take no talent. And, obviously playing hard and physical, smart and disciplined, and eliminating turnovers, because most of that is a fundamental skill. Then there's those subcategories to that we emphasize. But 11 and 1 to me is getting 11 guys to play as one. There's 11 guys on offense, but only one ball. So that just preaches unselfishness, and we reinforce that. If we have one football, what's 10 other guys doing to help that play be successful? And then I always felt like, and I know this is not 100% true, but in my antagonism toward defensive coaches sometimes, I always said their life was a lot easier, because I felt like offensively, it took 11 guys to make a play good. It only took one guy to mess it up. And defensively, there could be, out of 11 guys, 10 could be wrong, but one guy makes a play for you and bails you out. And I know that could help on offense a little bit too, but just from the very snap of the football, if there's not some things that happen and soundly and correctly, the play never gets going or off the ground. But I would say spring football day one, ideally, I want our two meshes in place. I want our be able to identify our 5 major fronts, and with some proficiency, be able to execute our core plays. We have 5 core run plays, 2 core pass protections, and then the different bells and whistles off of each. But if we went to spring ball with those things in place, certainly not perfect, but at least ready to start executing, then I felt like that was ideal if we could take the field in that. And our drills would, we, like everybody, we split we were a one platoon team. So we were not able to split our squad. So we had limited time, which makes me even more proud of what we maintained over 20 years, is we did it with just less than half of the total practice time when you mix in special teams and defense. And our kids had to learn both sides of the ball. So we always had to balance how much we were putting on them, but also having enough in to remain relevant and effective. If
Okay.
that answers the question.
No, that does. No, that's kind of how it was kind of when I was reading the chapter, wondering how you did it, because that's again X and O's are great, and I've heard, I mean, by doing this and other things, like I've heard people and I've watched people run the triple or hell inside zone. That's great, but until you explain to me how you teach it and how you get it through your kids, it's also for me personally. Is there a better way as I go forward as a coach? So I've done this 12 years that I can teach stuff to kids. Like there is no one shoe fits all or one size fits all mechanism for kids. Every kid's different, how they learn, but some people have a better way that just clicks with a wider majority of kids, which leads to less reteaching. The other thing I wanted, you mentioned something there. You talked about the cadence was a little bit more difficult thing there, or just timing it up. Why is that? Like, and then what kind of goes into making sure that is where you need to? Is there certain group drills you use, pod drills? Like, what? How do you focus on your cadence? Why does it take as much as it does?
Well, most guys that I've talked to in this offense have settled in on a rhythmic cadence, and you'll still see some teams that don't. And the one way to spot it is you'll see the quarterback foot the motion. He'll trigger with his foot, and playing quarterback, but never playing being a triple option quarterback. I always just knew pre-snap how much was on a quarterback, and I'm always trying to take more off of them because they naturally have a lot on their plate in any decision-making offense, whether it's zone read, spread, throwing principles, or under center flexbone. And so we trigger our motions, and of course this is a motion-based offense with our slots, our wings, and most people are. And those motion triggers, and I try to break it down into 3 different triggers, are tied to the cadence. So that cadence, the initial cadence. Now you got to have some curveballs in there. It can't just be the straight cadence every time. Yeah. You know, you got to have some fastballs and some off speed, and then your normals. And so we have our rhythmic normal cadence, like everybody, which is almost like a bait because the defense gets baited into that. I'll tell you, Coach, probably the first 8 to 10 years that we ran this offense here, until our same conference opponents or district opponents got used to it, man, you're looking at 3 to 5 freebies a game of defense offsides. I mean, we got as many as 8 or 9 in one game. So that was a side effect that you couldn't count on, but it was a nice one. It kept the defense honest because you had some curveballs in there. But our motion triggers were tied to different parts of our cadence. And how we potted that was something that was a non-negotiable with me. Was every day. If we were going on the field, we were going to do a snap, cadence, and 2-step drill. Whether it was off to the side, whether it's out of the way. And we had, and that ties to what I'll say next is we have almost most of our offensive linemen worked at center because I never wanted us to be short of a center and being able to keep our best 5 in the game. So usually all 5 of our starting offensive linemen snapped the ball, and then we cherry picked the remaining guys. So all of our quarterbacks always had somebody to snap from. We had multiple guys that could snap, and we had just a kind of a group drill, almost a big circle, where different guys called out the cadence, and they rotated around because I felt like, if we have some things about taking the snap in place, how we put our hand, how the center snapping the ball, and the rhythmic of our cadence, we should be able to snap the ball from anybody, anytime. And then we incorporated 2 steps to that drill, and then we incorporated our A-backs, our slots in that drill, to where we would just call out plays. So the center was stepping in relation to a play. So he wasn't just snapping and standing there. He was snapping and moving forward like you want him to. Then our quarterbacks were taking the first 2 steps of those drills. And then we had our A-backs triggering just for a step or 2, not full motion. It was really a warm-up, but it was a warm-up with a purpose. We're getting rhythmic, we're getting cadence, and we're getting our first 2 steps in our motion triggers all tied in that one pod drill. And I tell you, I call it the most important 5 minutes of the day because that's the battery of your offense. If you're not getting the snap and the cadence, man, we're going to have a rough time executing anything. And I'll give ourselves credit for that. We very rarely mess that part of it up because we just repped it every day.
Okay. Now, kind of just build off that real quick. What does a general offensive, and I know every offensive practice is different and depending on the week, the time of the year, what you're installing, but what is because you've given some of it so far, what does a general offensive practice look like for you?
Well, I looked at offensive practice as three different types of practice. We had spring ball, we had fall camp, and then we had in season. Spring ball was a lot more flexible because being in the situation we were at for Parkview, our 8th graders going to be 9th graders. We're already on campus. And as long as they signed a waiver saying that by going through spring football, I'm making Parkview my school of first choice for high school, I'm committed to them that freshman year. So if they signed that and went through spring football and said, I really don't want to play in the Flexbone, or I don't want to be here, I don't like these guys, such and such down the streets recruit me, then they lost that freshman year. So, but we did have 99.9% of our 8th graders going through spring with us. And we get our hands on them a little bit before spring football, but not a ton. So spring, we would split our individual drills in what we call A and Bs. A's for being, for lack of a better term, advanced, B for beginners. And it allowed me to do specific, and every coach, to do specific drills for the maturity of the group I had. And so if I was with the A's, those were guys that were probably returning, older, more experienced with the offense. We could focus on things of where they're at. Whereas the B's, when I got them and the A's were on defense, we were able to do more things very basic for them. So spring football was very flexible on if we were going to inter squad scrimmage some, do some kind of offensive line recognition drill, anything. Fall camp was more pointed toward really just sharpening, getting ready for every defense, getting our schemes in place. So it may be more group and team drills that are, along with a lot of individuals still, focused on just getting sharp at our skills, but also with an awareness of fronts and stunts at all times. But once fall camps was over and we got ready for season, it was really 4 separate days. Monday we called mental Monday, and we usually played JV on Mondays, and so it was a shorter practice. It was a day that we usually went out with just helmets. We were still digesting the scout report, especially with defense, because like I said, game planning for offense in the Flexbone is a loose term because your offense is always in. It's trying to prioritize your reps for the looks you expect and any little tweaks that you're putting in, or if you have to rep personnel different, or if you want to add a formation and rep some things out of it. So that was really more of a group team type of day, especially on offense. But Tuesday and Wednesday were a little bit more routine. We always started practice with some type of purpose-filled warm-up. And for me, it was quarterbacks, centers, A-backs with our cadence, snap, motion trigger. Receivers were doing something individual. O-line and receivers always had more true individual time than anybody. And they went through a circuit of warm-ups. The next 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how good we were at it, was a drill, which I got to where it was just tremendously helpful. I call it an all-in-one drill, just like a better term. If you looked at it, you'd say, well, Coach, that's just half line. It was half line without the A-backs. It was center, guard tackle, possibly 3-man surface if you're working at that, and a quarterback and a fullback. And we had a scout look and we had a script. One day would be more of an even front focus. The next day would be an odd front focus. And our quarterbacks and our backs rotated left side or right side from one day to the next. So they got, a good dose of both sides. And that's one thing about triple option. You can't just be a right-handed team or dominant hand team. You got to be able to run everything both ways because the defense may push you to one side or the other. And numerically, you may have an advantage. So you got to rep everything both ways. How guys are able to flip their O-line and do that is never clicked with me. We worked, guys on just one side of the ball or the other as far as the linemen go. But we went through all of our diehard schemes as far as option-based schemes. And we got live reads, adjustment schemes, and footwork. Man, and it was just a great period to really keep things available. So if we knew we were playing a really good team that was a 4-3 team, no matter what you did, even to that extent, we still on the odd front day we focused on the 3-3, 5-1 bear, 3-4-50, because I never wanted us to get away from those schemes and keep them available. From there, we would move to some type of passing drill, whether it was routes on air, one-on-one, or some type of skill against our own defense. And then, of course, O-line is working the same thing with our D-line, whether it's pass pro, pass draw, screen period. And for us to get a realistic look at a scale setting or 7-on-7 setting, we had to make it a perimeter drill. And that's something I try to do some in the summertime when everybody's doing true 7-on-7, is I try to get some like-minded teams to do a perimeter drill. You had to be careful with it so it doesn't get too physical, but make it to where it's perimeter run, perimeter screen, and throwing the football. So you got because, I mean, if I went true a lot and somebody's giving me a 4-3 hip with safeties at 12, 15 yards and backers at 6 yards, I would look at them and shrug my shoulders, just like, 1st and 10, if we're really playing and I'm running what I'm running, are you really going to do that? Absolutely not. Because I would never throw the ball on you. We'd rush for 500 yards. So I had to get perimeter drills from our own defense, and we had to spice him up so that we got, perimeter option, toss, quick screens, and then play action and throwing off of it. And then from there, we usually evolved to maybe a brief inside period, just keeping our inside schemes physical, isolations, traps, and things like that. And then we went into a team, and team for us was always fast. We, believe it or not, coach, for our Flexbone team, we worked no huddle and 2-minute offense more than probably any spread team that was a one platoon team you've ever seen, because we did so much play calling at the line of scrimmage, whether it was 2-minute or regular offense. We had all kind of little checks and schemes and alerts and alarms and lookovers ready to go at the line of scrimmage, because I'm just selfish. I always wanted to have the marker last in the final say before the play.
Yeah.
You may whip my tail, but it's not because you fooled me or because you got to a look at the last second that I wasn't ready for. We were going to be ready for it, and we were going to have the final say, whether I had it or my quarterback or somebody on the line had to say. So that's, and we ended the week with mostly situational stuff, team segments, and of course blending in special teams and things like that. So nothing really fancy. It was just getting the offense installed in a communicative way that you could just build on and teach over and over and over, and you had a great foundation to grow from.
Okay, now you said not being prepared for everything there. So obviously you go over like your 5 to 6 main defenses you see. But what happens when you get that, what I call a junk defense, the 7-1 diamonds where they put everybody on the line, one linebacker deep, or the weird 6 fronts that like it's not a 4-4, but it's something like, what happens when you get those weird, just what I call just trash junk defenses? How do you deal, or how do you prepare for something like that? Obviously, like, it's a desperation play because for somebody who doesn't know how to defend your offense, but like, what do you tell your kids? What is your kind of mindset there?
Oh man, that's a great question, because this got me before. I call them extreme fronts. And I tell our kids, look, no matter what they line up in, we're going to put it into one of 5 categories. We're going to call it one of 5 things. That's it. And now it could be a variation of that, maybe different than what we've seen, but we've got to fit it into one of those categories. And I haven't seen a front that we wouldn't. And I tell them, it's whether it's unsound or a junk front, it's not unsound until we can exploit it and prove that it is. So until we make sense of it, let's say you get a team that's fairly athletic, but maybe a little undisciplined, but willing to kind of roll the dice and give you something exotic and weird. And man, they're popping gaps and they're causing you fits. I said, look, it's going to feel like they're playing with 15 guys on defense until we settle down and get a hold of that defense. And so that's why I always big when we put in defenses and talk plays that it's not it's not who a defender is. It's not always where he is. What matters first is what he is. So in any front, it was important to us to recognize who the zero, if they had a zero nose, that was a big deal. Or if he's a shade, because we started our count from there. The first down lineman, second down lineman, play side backer, force defender. You could have the same guy in a 4-2 look that's playing right outside your slot and say he's number 25. Well, in a 4-2, we call that guy a rover. Some people call him a spur or bandit or jack, but he's a rover is the way we see 8-man front that player. They stem to a 4-3, and maybe they stem it the other way, where one of them becomes the Mike, the other one bumps out, the other rover kicks back, gives you a 2-shell. Well, to the quarterback who identifies our fronts, that's a 4-3. Well, if I'm playing right wing and number 25 out there in that same position has now become a 4-3 hip backer, that's a different guy. I mean, that's a different position. And how we handle him in some ways could be different. So we always had to be tied to that front. I would say the hardest fronts to really get a handle on, and it usually happens in the 7-man front, is a 4-3 or 50 that will give you 3 guys stacked over the ball. It's more common out of a 50 now. Some people call it a Lincoln stack or a 50 stack with a nose and the 2 backers stacked up. Then you made 4 eyes, 9 techniques and 2 safeties. If you haven't taught your quarterback to see that as a 50, that can be, kind of a tricky thing at first. And then we even had one team one night play a 4-3, but they stacked the two techniques and the mic right over the ball. So we had to kind of make sense of that because we had never seen that and kind of had to give it an identity. But once we're able to something really weird and strange, once we're able to really fit it into the category of one of our big 5 fronts, then our kids can figure out who's who and what's what and make sense from there.
Okay. Now the other thing, then last question I have for you is, and I ask this for a variety of coaches and a variety of options, but what is your favorite Flexbone play? See, you always get the pause, like you want to answer about 5 your ways, but yeah, like what, like,
yes.
and it's not doesn't have to be the most successful one, but like the one that you enjoy calling, like what is, or installing, like what is one that your favorite one to go into?
Probably midline double. I love mid triple, and veer triple is great too. But I love, and the Flexbone coaches feel this way because they always think in terms of their core runs, and it's like, okay, it's like a family of 5 kids. You got to have them all. I mean, you don't want to lose any of them. So it's hard to separate any of those. But I would say mid double for this reason is early on here. That was such a play that devastated people that didn't know how to defend it. We could get into all kind of different formations and still have a mid-double play, even if perimeter numbers were not friendly. I tie a lot of attached runs, attached passes to a mid-double package. So if I want to throw 4 verticals, very generic, at a double slot against 1 high, but the team is stemming around and not really staying 1 high, sometimes they're showing you 2, whatever, you don't really want to get into that world, then I'll attach mid-double to it and give my quarterback a way to get out of it if the look is not friendly. Maybe with a perimeter screen, mid-double is attached to it. So it's been a very bailout play, effective play, versatile play, and based on that, I would have to say mid-double. It always feels good to call. For me, it's 10 and 11. As always, it never feels real bad to call 10 or 11.
Okay. Well, coaches Twitter bio will be in the link in the description below. I am butchering this like no other right now. Make sure you give him a follow. Great stuff. I mean, you can literally just search his name and you'll find a bunch of stuff on YouTube. I think he's got Coach's Choice stuff with Cheap Pick. He's got all kinds of stuff. Okay, so you can find stuff, reach out to him. Coach is very easy to get a hold of. Like, share, subscribe, all that lovely jazz. Check out our sponsor, Coachpad. And then otherwise, that is another episode of the Gap Down Backer podcast.